and the website is warroom.com, bigger than life and twice as ugly. Okay, we have a guest on the show. His name is John Guandolo. He's a former FBI agent, and we're going to get to him in a second here. But just to set this up, let's review. John Brennan was just confirmed as the CIA director. John Brennan once said this.
Hezbollah started out as purely a terrorist organization back in the early 80s and has evolved significantly over time. And now it has members of parliament in the cabinet.
You know, Hitler was elected democratically, too. I don't know why. I'm sorry, I failed to see what this has to do with anything.
There are lawyers, doctors, others who are part of the Hezbollah organization.
Oh, well, then that makes it okay, then. Let's see, how many Hezbollah cells do we have in this country ready to move at a moment's notice from President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad?
And so, quite frankly, I'm pleased to see that a lot of Hezbollah individuals are, in fact, renouncing that type of terrorism and violence.
Sure they are.
And are trying to participate in the political process in a very legitimate fashion.
Okay, that's your CIA director, an apologist for Hezbollah. But it gets worse.
Our enemy is not terrorism because terrorism is but a tactic. Our enemy is not terror because terror is a state of mind. And as Americans, we refuse to live in fear. Nor do we describe our enemy as jihadists or Islamists because jihad is a holy struggle, a legitimate tenet of Islam.
Yeah, so jihad is just a holy struggle. It doesn't have anything to do with this box cutter here or my suicide vest. And then he takes the oath of office, not on a Bible, but on a draft of the Constitution, which doesn't include the Bill of Rights. John Guandolo, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay. I'm a little nervous about all this. Should I be?
You should. And I would say that the events that you just described, the things you just described with Mr. Brennan are simply a symptom of a much greater problem of where we are in our inside our government with the penetration of the Muslim Brotherhood and the foreign policy and domestic counterterrorism strategies of the government being heavily influenced by them, which was behind the story that kind of prompted this interview.
Yeah, well, our government is just shot through with people that are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. I went down the list just the other day, and it's just dumbfounding. We are with Islam where we were with communism in 1951. So we should have listened to read Stanton Evans' book, and you'll find out we should have listened to Joe McCarthy. But now you are alleging that when Brennan was in Riyadh. And I know that he speaks fluent Arabic, that he converted to Islam?
Yes, but, and again, the focus of my report that's gotten a lot of interesting attention across the globe. And interestingly enough, I might lead off by saying that Al Arabiya, which is a Mideast media outlet, actually wrote one of the most objective pieces where they suggested that this absolutely could be so, that he converted because of the fact of his likely attendance, he went through Mecca, and no non-Muslims are allowed in Mecca. And so obviously Al Arabiya was saying, the suggestion is if that's true, of course he has to be a Muslim because non-Muslims are not allowed there. But they actually gave the story a fair shake, whereas only a few outlets in the U.S. did. And there's a couple other overseas outlets that gave it a fair shake. But the crux of the story was not his conversion and him saying the Shahada. The crux of the story was Mr. Brennan, as the chief of station for the CIA in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was recruited by Saudi intelligence and Saudi government officials who were attempting, obviously, to recruit him in an intelligence operation. So it was his saying the Shahada, which is a very, actually, simple procedure, although they do it with great reverence in their own right. He did that. And that was the culmination of this effort by Saudi intelligence and Saudi government officials.
Well, so what you're saying here is it's not just that he went to Riyadh and decided that that he liked Islam and wanted to convert, that his conversion was part of an actual subversion. He was the target of an intelligence operation, and he got snookered.
Yeah, but and this is what the audience, I think, would encourage them to strongly understand is the Saudis are aggressive in their intelligence operations. We have John Brennan is not the only chief of station of the CIA that was recruited by the Saudis, and at least two others that I'm aware of converted as well. And on 9/11, the legal attaché and the assistant legal attaché for the FBI in Riyadh, were both Muslim. So you've got a real operation here, and that's the story. The story is we look at this whole war as terrorism, or whatever you want to call it, the global war on terror. This president calls it contingency operations, whatever we're going to call it. What Mr. Brennan didn't answer is who is the enemy, because what he has said for his entire time that he's been in advising the president is that Al-Qaeda is the enemy, and Al-Qaeda is the only enemy. But the Muslim Brotherhood and the bloc of the 57 Islamic states under an international organization called the Organization of Islamic Conference, which is second only to the United Nations in size and scope at the head of state and king level. Their objectives are the same as Al-Qaeda's, are the same as the Muslim Brotherhood, which is to reestablish the Islamic State, the caliphate, under which Sharia is the law of the land, and impose it on the entire world. They say it. They write about it. Al-Qaeda does, the Brotherhood does. So this is a unified effort. And when you have Muslim brothers that we can name who are advising the President of the United States, who are advising the National Security Council, who sit on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee, who are briefing the CIA on a regular basis, when you have men that you can point to that are known Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas operatives, that federal courts, that documents have demonstrated that who these men are. As a matter of fact, just in the last 2 days, there's a Muslim brother, Harris Turin, who's the director of something called the Muslim Public Affairs Council, which is the Muslim Brotherhood front. The D.C. office, he just had intimate meetings with President Obama in advance of his trip to the Middle East. So when you talk about the implications of our foreign policy, our defense, our national security, and our domestic counterterrorism policy, there is a massive problem. This thing with John Brennan, I understand, I'm not naive, I understand why the story exploded, but it is but a symptom of a much, much greater national security threat that most Americans are still not aware of.
Well, and you're exactly right. Now, we had the audio just the other day. We've played it for several months here of Thomas Perez from the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department refusing to guarantee Congress that the Justice Department would never make it a crime to criticize a quote-unquote religion. But we all know what religion we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's right. And I, again, if I leave a few thoughts with your audience, I think the first thought I just kind of laid out is that this is a significant national security threat. The other, another major point is you just nailed is their goal. They've been able since in the last couple of years through working with our national security leadership, they have been able to strip this discussion that you and I are having in a formal training setting out of the Department of Defense, Joint Forces Staff College, the War Colleges, the National Defense University, out of the FBI, out of the CIA, although it was never really at the CIA or State Department. The programs, internal and external to these organizations, where the truth about the threat was laid out factually, using court evidence, using Muslim Brotherhood documents, Al-Qaeda strategy documents, laying out what they're doing and how they're doing it, has been completely stripped from this government. not only that, then the other piece of it is anytime someone speaks up, they're assaulted. And this campaign, the enemy, our enemy, has literally labeled it Islamophobia. They've detailed that they want criminal implications on people who say anything negative about Islam. And of course, you can just see a few days ago in Lahore, Pakistan, over 100 homes burned down and Christians killed. We're seeing in Mali, we're seeing it in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Sweden, and we're seeing it in the United States in places like Dearborn and New York and Tampa, Florida. And not necessarily burning people's houses and killing people, but we're certainly seeing the assault on people. We've seen it towards authors, towards speakers, towards journalists, and it's documented across the board. When people say something factual about Islam, and why is that? Because Islamic law says that that's a capital crime.
That's matter. Right. And they want our government to be Sharia compliant. And I mean, look, well, take a look at Benghazi when they started to blame the video. Okay, what did Hillary Clinton do? Hillary Clinton promised that she would make sure that the guy who made the video was punished. Well, she's practicing Sharia law.
That's right, and I think as I travel around the country and talk to folks, whether it's members of Congress or 3- and 4-star generals or citizens or police officers, it doesn't matter. They say, well, come on, can Sharia really be imposed on the United States? And when we lay out our long-term program, and when I lay out in a day, here's their strategy, here's how they're implementing, these individuals, these cops, these military leaders, they all see that Sharia law is being imposed here. And it's in examples just like that. We are making domestic counterterrorism policy and foreign policy decisions that absolutely ensure that Sharia is being complied with. That's how it's being done. But the primary way is to shut you up.
Well, now, and of course,
you cannot say that.
Yeah, what we just did, by the way, on this radio station, will be punishable as a crime, probably a felony at some time in the future if they get their way. Can you stay with us?
I can.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We got a few minutes on the other side talking to John Guandolo, FBI, and I understand that you also have some corroborating, some folks who will corroborate some of this stuff too. So let's get to it and take the break, and we'll be right back. One 800-507-1047. Webpage is warroom.com. Our guest is John Guandolo, FBI, our former FBI agent. Let's get him on the air here. Okay, John, is it possible for you to stick with us into the next half hour?
It is.
Okay, good, because we only have a few minutes here, and I understand that when it comes to the Brennan part of this story, that there are others in Saudi Arabia who witnessed this, or who are aware of it.
That's right. That's where the story, and that was the discussion I had before I ran with the story, is, do you run with a story based on individuals that I know and trust and had direct knowledge of it, because they're not willing to come forward because they are still in government service. And guys on the inside understand that obviously this would be a career ender to come out and speak truth into this. So I did, and I talked to friends of mine in the media, and they're like, we can't run with it if your sources don't come forward, and I understood that, but some did. But that's the critique. I think at some point it'll come out. I think his own actions, though, again, are indicative of where he stands on this.
Well, this is the last guy we need as director of the CIA.
Right.
And of course, everybody is afraid of Islam. Now, we were going to be carried by WTOP in Washington, D.C., but they freaked out when they found out that we had a tendency to tell the truth about Islam. It was like, well, no, can't do it. We get too many letters from the imams down here, and they organize and everything else. We don't want to deal with it.
And by the way, we could go through the list of the imams in this area, the D.C. area, and nearly every single one is a Muslim brother. You could literally go by name and by the Islamic centers down here.
I mean, look at Virginia. Look at some of the Islamic schools there. I mean, you have maps without Israel on them. Anyway, who are we kidding here? Who are we kidding? We're kidding ourselves, actually, is what we're doing. Anyway, look, I've got to take a break here. I'm up against a hard break. So we're talking to former FBI agent John Guandolo, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to the best of America's Morning Show with Quinn and Rose.
From the War Room, it's America's Morning Show with Quinn and Rose. We're talking to former FBI agent John Guandolo, who has written about John Brennan, our new CIA director, and his conversion to Islam, along with others who were stationed in Saudi Arabia, and that indeed it was more than just a conversion, but actually an intelligence strategy on the part of the Saudis. Now, I want to get back to John. John, are you there?
I am.
Okay. And by the way, that part of the story is, as if you've been listening, is just part of a larger strategy of the worldwide Islamic Caliphate movement. I want to read you a couple of names here, and let me know if any of these names are familiar to you. Okay.
Okay.
Arif Ali Khan, the Assistant Secretary for Policy Development for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security.
Yes.
Okay. Mohammed Ilibiari, Homeland Security Advisor.
Yes.
Rashad Hussain, Special Envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference.
Yes.
Salam al-Mariyati, Obama Advisor and founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Council and its current Executive Director.
Yes.
Ibu Patel, Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. Sounds like a Muslim acorn.
Yes, I know who Patel is.
Okay, and finally, Imam Mohammed Majid.
Oh, my buddy. Yes, yeah, I know him.
The Islamic Society of North America, and also, it says here, Obama's Sharia czar?
Well, he is, first of all, Mohammed Majid is a great place to start, and I'm glad you brought this up because in the first portion of our discussion, people can accuse us of just talking in generalities, but let's go with a few of these names because these are key people. Mohammed Majid is probably one of the more important ones. Now, here's a guy who's the president of the Islamic Society of North America, the largest Muslim Brotherhood entity in North America. He's also the executive director of the Adams Center in Sterling, Virginia, just outside of D.C., the All Dulles Area Muslim Society Center, and which is a Muslim Brotherhood front. And so people ask, well, how do you know ISNA is a Muslim Brotherhood front? Well, in 2004, very briefly, the FBI raided a home of a senior Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas leader, because Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine, in Annandale, Virginia. And in that raid, we discovered the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. Many of those documents were entered into evidence in the trial in Dallas against the Holy Land Foundation, which was a Hamas front. And this was the largest Hamas trial and terrorism financing trial ever successfully prosecuted in U.S. history. The documents entered demonstrated that ISNA was created to be the nucleus of the Islamic movement in North America, that historical documents demonstrate that it is key in establishing a lot of the other front groups. It became really an umbrella group for the major Muslim Brotherhood groups and that had been created up until the early 80s here. And now it's also the evidence demonstrated that ISNA is a financial support entity for the terrorist group Hamas, which is why, and the U.S. government labeled it as a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. So that's in official court documents. So that is not even up for discussion. Now you have Mohammed Majid, who's the president of ISNA, who advises, under the direction of Mr. Brennan, the National Security Council, who sits on the advisory committee for Secretary Napolitano of Homeland Security, who is deeply involved, who has been deeply involved in briefings at the CIA, who has led classes. I actually wrote an article for Breitbart.com this past summer, and actually it showed the documents where he moderated a panel on the U.S. government's interface with the Muslim community in the United States. He's directly involved with advice and policy writing for the United States. This is, I would argue, this is not sane practice within our government to have a guy like this in this kind of an influential position.
Well, it depends on what kind of government you think we have. I mean, I'm always astounded, although I do understand it. I think I'm always astounded at the affinity that the political left has for Islam. You never hear complaints from feminists about the treatment of women. You never hear complaints from gay groups about the treatment of gays. You never hear complaints from any of these various disparate groups about how Islam treats people and people within those groups. And yet, the Hollywood left and the academic left in this country, I'm looking at an article here about Yale's Sex Week. These are the people who are creating a society that the Sharia-compliant Muslims hate the most and would be, frankly, the first to go. And yet, just because it's hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go, and the two of them share that, apparently it's birds of a feather.
It is amazing, but not surprising. This is, historically, if you look at other movements, not to go too deep into history, but just if we look at between today, going back the 20th century, the communist movement, the Nazi movement, some of the socialist movements, it was in fact the intelligentsia, the arts, the people in the arts, the gay communities, and others that initially were courted or supported these things because those leaders of those movements also lied about the intentions, their real intentions. And so at the end, the first people that were killed were the very people that supported these movements initially. And those are the very same people who are doing it now.
It was interesting. I saw a picture of this crowd of people, and they had the Nazi swastika flags and all the Iron Cross, all the German stuff, and it was a black and white picture. And I was stunned when I realized it was Madison Square Garden.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and Time magazine made Hitler the Man of the Year. And it wasn't because, it wasn't like Ahmadinejad. It was, Hitler. They thought he was a good guy. They thought Mussolini was a good guy. Roosevelt thought that their economics was the top-down economics of grand scale that would bring us into the future. And it got to the point with Roosevelt that his advisors finally said to him, "Look, you got to stop this, drooling over Stalin and Mussolini and Hitler, because people are starting to include you in like the big four." They talk about Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, and Roosevelt. So already they had some suspicions that things weren't quite right in Germany. But, you're right. It's always the elites and the intelligentsia who are the first ones to walk away from the Constitution and embrace something else. I don't know what this is in these people that makes them this way.
My experience in talking to a lot of people around the country over the last number of years about the threat, and again, when I sit down, it's primarily I discuss the threat from the global Islamic movement. But when you look at the level of threats that are closing in on us, attacks on our financial networks, Russia, China, you could include North Korea, Iran, but certainly the Russia-China is a huge threat to our infrastructure, and we are just absolutely asleep at the wheel. and all the policies that this administration are enacting are weakening our defenses, are weakening our intelligence programs. I mean, I argue, if you look at what's going on, our intelligence and counterintelligence in this country is not just broken. I think it's dead, and it's going to need some serious revival. But to this understanding, I think there is a much deeper cultural and social problem that is enabling this. I mean, I say when I speak, even to members of Congress, when they ask, well, okay, so you've defined the enemy, what do you think the key problem is? And I say the problem is us. And the problem is we have lost not just our understanding of our founding and the principles upon which this nation was founded. We have lost the ability to even begin to defend it and speak about it in terms that are clear and articulate, the same terms that the founders used, that the first generation used after President Washington was elected, where we stepped forward in claiming this nation. When you look at people who defend Ahmadinejad, the Jimmy Carters of the world, and they come in all shapes and sizes. I think in a lot of cases, although I think some of them are nefarious, many folks are well-intentioned, but it's these same well-intentioned people that gathered around Neville Chamberlain when he came back waving this the compact there with Adolf Hitler, who promised to do certain things, and of course he rolled right over and murdered millions of people. And that is what this movement is all about. The Muslim Brotherhood leaders in the United States and in Europe who are working with governments and have got them bent over the barrel and convinced that they are good guys are not. And we have literally hundreds of examples of guys we lean on, and then in the future they turn out to be jihadists. Anwar al-Awlaki was called in the media a moderate Muslim, the next generation of really wonderful Muslims. He's brought into the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, to speak on the Prophet Muhammad and to teach and lead prayers. He was invited into the Pentagon, and then what happens? Well, he's the leader of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, and we kill him. Abdurrahman al-Amudi is the Islamic advisor to President Clinton and Vice President Gore. He works with the State Department to lead Middle East peace process efforts. He creates the Muslim chaplain program for the Department of Defense, and it turns out he's a financier for Al-Qaeda. I mean, these are the same men, like you just mentioned, Mohammed Majid, Salam al-Mariyati, and these others. These are the guys now we're leaning on who we're just going to assume are good, and yet it flies in the face of the facts and the evidence that we have that these are leaders of Muslim Brotherhood organizations.
Well, they've pretty much figured us out. I mean, we've had at least 40 years of moral relativism and situational ethics in our schools. And of course, once upon a time, you went to school to acquire the judgment or the amount of wisdom that was necessary to make a judgment about what is good, what is bad, what is cheap, what is worthwhile. Today, our educational system breeds that out. Today, our educational system is designed to produce an American that will tolerate anything for fear of being called intolerant. And so as soon as you speak out against Islam, somebody says, well, you're speaking out against another person's religion, and that's against the First Amendment. But it's way more than a religion. It's an education system. It's a political system. It's a judicial system. It's a financial system. And that system is informed directly, as opposed to ours, informed directly by religion, which is antithetical to where's the separation of church and state, people, when it comes to Islam?
Well, and I would go a little farther and to clarify it, because if you look at first grade textbooks, if you look on the website of the Islamic centers of these Muslim Brotherhood organizations, if you pick up any book of Sharia, and by the way, Sharia is published in English. You can go to Amazon.com, put in Islamic law. You'll get dozens of Islamic law books from around the world. And a couple things I guess I would like to leave with your audience on what you just said is, at the first grade level and all the way up, Islam says Islam is a complete way of life, social, military, cultural, religious, political, all governed by Sharia, by Islamic law. 100%. 100% of all authoritative published Islamic law says that there must be a caliphate and that Islamic law must become the law of the land for the entire world. And the vehicle to do it is jihad. 100% of all published Islamic law
all right, well,
only defines jihad as warfare against non-Muslims.
Oh, exactly. I mean, even if Brendan hasn't figured it out, we have. One more break, and then we'll let you go, okay? It's going to be real short. We're talking to John Guandolo. All right, we're speaking to John Guandolo, former FBI. John, I've only got about a minute and a half here. I want you to stay on the line if you would be kind enough to do that. I have a question to ask, and I don't have time to ask it here. But since we only have about a minute and 20 seconds, having said all of this, what the hell can we do about it?
Well, I think the answer lies in people, number one, understanding this. And there are a lot of places you can do that. I don't know if I gave my understandingthethreat.com is my site where people can go and get a lot of the information or links to other information. But you gotta understand this. Number one, though, on the top of what people can do is if you understand how dangerous the situation has become, it's only at the local and state level that this is going to get solved. The nature of what this is a movement. This is these aren't just terrorists. This is a movement inside our country that's been here for 50 years. And when you understand that, the biggest thing that came out of that Holy Land Foundation trial, largest Hamas trial in U.S. history, and all those documents, was that there is a movement here, an Islamic movement led by the Muslim Brotherhood. That was determined in those documents. And so it has to be at the state and local level that we start taking action. Because it starts with people standing up.
The guys in the national government are too scared to be politically incorrect. Look, I'm up against a hard break. I want to thank you for joining us today. John Guandolo, former FBI. John, don't hang up. I'm going to hit the computer here in a second. I do have a question I want to ask before you go.